The year is 1929. The New York Stock Exchange has received news that the stock market has reached its greatest low yet. The day will be known as the Great Crash. For many it came out of nowhere, but for a select few like Roger Babson, this day was inevitable. However, what came next was a period unprecedented in American history, the Great Depression. Here with me today are some fellow former leaders who are eager to learn more about this era, specifically as it pertains to the forging of a liberal society, led by FDR. Joe, can you give us some more context on the Depression?
Yes, right. One of the major causes of the Great Depression is the failure of banks and an economic system weighed down by credits. After World War I, there was a rise of consumerism. Americans indulged unnecessary spending. Most Americans had no savings at all and bought everything on credit. This system would come crashing down with any economic problems, and that is exactly what happened. The stock market crashed. People did not have trust in the economy, and everyone wanted to withdraw money from the bank all at once. They loaned out the money to the people who made risky investments where they lost all of it to the market crash, and the people who contributed to consumerism. The point is, the banks did not have enough money for all of the depositors. After, one bank failed. People panicked. This panic spreaded like a wildfire, and more people wanted to withhold money. The cycle repeats. This will be known as the Panic of 1930.
Wow, Joe, I never knew you had it in you to do it. Well, like Bush, I'm curious, did the Federal Reserve at least bail the banks out?
No, the beta male Federal Reserve did not bail the banks out, but they should have, like how the Sigma male bailed out Silicon Valley Bank. I covered enough of the losses at the Silicon Valley Bank so most people wouldn't lose their life savings, and it calmed everyone down, and people didn't all withdraw at once. Maybe if the Federal Reserve did the same, here would not be a depression.
Oh, you're the Sigma now? Don't you think bailing the Silicon Valley Bank would cause banks to be less careful because it spreads the idea that the government will always bail the banks out so there are no consequences?
As much as I hate this guy, he's right. There still would have been a recession even if the banks did not fail. It's good to remember that the Great Depression wasn't caused by one single thing, but a series of things. Take the gold standard. To understand why the gold standard made the Depression worse, you must understand deflation. Deflation is when general prices goes down. In the case of the Depression, the deflation is caused by a series of events. First, consumerism encouraged many people to buy a lot of things, but people generally don't buy the same thing twice. After people buy everything they want, they will stop buying. When the customers stop buying, the companies will have excess goods, which means they will cut employees to make up the money lost in the surplus. The more the employees get cut, the less people can afford the goods. The companies will have to lower their prices so more people can afford their goods. The cycle continues.
Also, keep in mind that debt also plays a role in this situation.
Thanks, Bush.
No problem.
Here we go again.
Anyways, continuing on with what I was saying. If more cash was introduced to the economy, this cycle could be reversed. If more cash was introduced, people would be able to afford more things and buy them. The companies will rehire again. However, cash couldn't be introduced because of the gold standard. The gold standard restricted the amount of cash in the cash flow because every dollar is backed by gold. There couldn't be magically more gold to get more cash, so the economy just continued its downward spiral.
Guys, I think the effects of the Depression should be our focus. By 1932, 1 of 4 working class were unemployed. Many Americans went homeless because they had no savings due to bank failures or poor financial choices. People lived in these Hoovervilles. Many unemployed went on a search for jobs on foot, though they were unlikely to be successful. Most businesses had already failed. Some lacked food and starved. As John Steinbeck describes in The Grapes of Wrath, and in the eyes of the people there is the failure, and in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage.
Joe, if you want to talk effects, talk real effects. During World War I, agriculture dramatically expanded due to the high demand of food because of war. The farmers bought machinery to mechanize the farms so they could produce more food. The machines were expensive. As a result, the farmers went into debt to pay for the equipment. After World War I ended, because of how much farms expanded, there was an overproduction of crops and the prices of the crops dropped. This caused the farmers to struggle with debts for equipment, and some were forced to close their farms.
Bro Donald, there weren't any crops in the first place because of the Dust Bowl.
Lock in.
Chill, sleepy. I was getting to the fact that this was before the Depression even started, and farmers were already going bankrupt. When the dust storm started, the farmers who already couldn't pay the debt now could not pay the debt at all. The farmers had to flee to California to find arable land that only took more money from them. When the Depression started, crop prices were also so low they made many of the farmers bankrupt. The Depression arguably hit the farmers the hardest.
Despite the suffering, Herbert Hoover, the president at the time, did not do much. Hoover stuck to his laissez-faire beliefs, which meant there should be limited government interference, if any, in the economy. This was a common ideology at the time. For things that he did attempt to do, it was either too late or not enough. For example, the Hawley-Smoot tariff. And the Hawley-Smoot tariff is the highest tariff made in U.S. history. Like every tariff, it is designed to increase domestic trade by putting duty on imports. However, the U.S. needed more global trade to help bring the rest of the world out of the Depression, so the rest of the world could buy more American products. In addition to this tariff, the European country also proposed more tariffs, which meant a taxation on foreign products.
Personally, I think libertarianism wasn't a hindrance to the economy.
Bro Hoover proposed the Revenue Act, which raised corporate taxes from 12% to 13.75%, and estate tax from 20% to 45%. It increased taxes on cars, radio, electricity, and etc. Its purpose was to balance the federal budget. It had a good aim, but the effect wasn't as good as the aims.
Thank you, Obama. I'm glad we could agree on this. I will be taking over this topic. The increase in estate tax was not that bad since it primarily affected rich people. The corporate tax did not affect many businesses because not a lot of businesses made profit anyways. A lot of people were too poor to buy anything. However, putting more taxes on cars, radio, and electricity discouraged people who could afford them to purchase them. The U.S. needed more people to buy things so America could get out of the Depression. Therefore, the Revenue Act of 1932 not only did not help, it made the situation arguably worse.
That's not real libertarianism.
Even though Biden ruined my transition. I will talk about Reconstruction Finance Corporation. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation provided emergency loans, which would have been great if Hoover implemented it before all the banks failed. This would have saved all the banks by giving them what they needed to give the depositors. The banks could have paid the government back from the previous loans they made out. The depositors were likely to put their money back after seeing that the banks were alive and stabilized. At this stage, emergency loans provided limited help. They could loan it to the businesses, but the businesses who survived this long probably were corporate giants who didn't need help with some exceptions. Or they could have loaned it to the banks that didn't fail yet. However, it would not fix the existing damages. This simply came too late.
The failure of Hoover can also be seen through the election of 1932. It was Franklin D. Roosevelt against Hoover. FDR ran for the Democrat Party, which hadn't won an election for a decade. However, FDR won by a landslide. FDR won both majority and electoral votes with an 18% gap in the popular vote. In the Electoral College, FDR won 472 to 59. In FDR's inauguration speech, he promised that he would battle the Great Depression differently and more effectively. This would pave way for the foundation of the new liberal state.
Yeah, I guess you're right. With FDR's victory came the first 100 days and the New Deal. The New Deal had several goals in mind that included economic recovery, relief for the needy, and financial reform.
The 3 R's. I do remember something from high school.
Right. The first New Deal aimed mainly to solve the immediate suffering of the people. During these first 100 days, he also introduced the Emergency Banking Act of 1933, Agricultural Adjustment Act, Civilian Conservation Corps, Federal Emergency Relief Act, and many more to accomplish the 3 R's. Is there anything you guys want to add?
Oh yeah, Bush. I mean, this guy really was the real deal. No pun intended. The Emergency Banking Act of 1933 brought vital confidence back into the American banking systems. The Banking Act of 1933 created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and Glass-Steagall Act. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was created in order to maintain stability and confidence in the nation's financial systems. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation began insuring bank accounts at no cost for up to $2,500. The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial banking from investment banking, prohibited bankers from using depositors' money in high-risk investments.
Are you guys done playing around yet? The Great Depression continued longer than it should have. Seeing how Joe inserted his little jab in the beginning, I'd like to add that I, Donald J. Trump, would never let it get this bad.
You already did, bro.
Of course, blaming your predecessor for your mistakes, what a cheap move. I wouldn't make that move. Ouch, Obama, fine, I'll do it. The banks didn't need that much time to separate their commercial and investment businesses. Both acts slowed the growth of the American banking industry and removed our banks from competing with other global-scale banks.
Even if there were some problems with the Banking Act, the pros severely outweigh the cons. He also created many other significant beneficial acts, including the Agricultural Adjustment Act.
Wow, Joe, is that what you got to say? Back it up with some evidence, bro.
Well, in the years after 1890, all farmers across the country were suffering from critical economic circumstances and the lowest agricultural prices ever. To counter this, FDR signed the Agricultural Adjustment Act, whose goals were to limit crop production, reduce stock numbers, and refinance mortgages with terms favorable to struggling farmers.
Thankfully, FDR signed the Agricultural Adjustment Act and attempted to make life livable for farmers. The government paid farmers to limit their crop production so the prices of crops would increase. The Cotton Control Act and Tobacco Control Act were added in 1934, creating a quota that gave cotton and tobacco farmers reduced taxes. The act worked, and farmers are now able to live off their own independently. The farmers' income increased by 50% in a short 3 years.
Wait, but why weren't all farmers helped equally? The act kind of hurt some farmers badly. The sharecroppers and tenant farmers had it the worst since. The amount paid by the government depended on the acreage of land unworked. It forced all farmers across the country to destroy acres worth of crops and slaughtered millions of livestock in order to qualify for the government's payments. The limitations in order to qualify for the subsidies left millions of Americans lacking adequate amounts of food. Many Americans were left to struggle and die of starvation. This left a majority of farming land having no productive value. Landlords often evicted tenant farmers due to the unplanted farmland. Also, cotton and tobacco were slave crops. I mean, crops that predominate in the antebellum South, which is kind of racist, not going to lie.
Okay, let's stray away from the depressing deaths of our people and look towards the bright side, such as the National Industrial Recovery Act or the Tennessee Valley Authority Act.
Never forget the sins of the past?
Yeah, I'll put him back on his prescription when we get home.
Well, for one, the National Industrial Recovery Act was made to help the workers throughout the nation. The act sought to eliminate cutthroat competition by bringing industry, labor, and the government together to create codes of fair practice and set prices. The act created the Public Works Administration and the National Recovery Administration.
Of course, both the Public Works Administration and the National Recovery Administration immensely helped a vast majority of the population. The National Recovery Administration attempted to eliminate unfair trade practices, reduce unemployment, establish minimum wages, and maximum hours. The National Recovery Act gave workers the right to unionize. Every business establishment in the country was called to accept a blanket code, a minimum wage of 20 to 45 cents per hour, a maximum work week of 35 to 45 hours, and the abolition of child labor.
If it did help everyone, what about the business owners? The business owners have to be forced into employing fewer people due to the minimum wage making it more expensive to employ people, meaning that millions of Americans will lose jobs because of the code. Having less workers also leads to a lower productivity.
That's crazy. To quell your troubles down. The Public Works Administration sought to reduce the unemployment rates of America. The Public Works Administration did this by creating jobs with infrastructure construction. They spent $7 billion worth on infrastructure by administering loans and grants to state and local governments, which then hired private contractors that did the work. Some of the projects of the Public Works Administration include Los Angeles International Airport, Bankhead Tunnel in Mobile, Alabama, and the Hoover Dam. This helped reduce the unemployment rates greatly.
Although the Public Works Administration did help out, it could have been better in many different aspects. The PWA was slow to deploy their infrastructure, since large public works projects like these always require vast amounts of planning before they get put into action. The PWA spent over $7 billion, but it didn't revert the level of industrial activity to match pre-depression levels. Their objective of creating a large number of quality, affordable housing units was one of their greatest failures.
All right, never mind Joe's socialist ramblings. How would building all these meaningless structures help us at all?
Well, Donald, these meaningless structures actually do serve a purpose for us. First of all, they built national roadways, bridges, tunnels, and airports that gave Americans of the past and present a more convenient means of transportation. The construction of the dams by both the Public Works Administration and the Tennessee Valley Authority provides us the ability to control water levels, meaning reduced floods, supplies water, and generates electricity to nearby homes. This led to the increase in electric appliances like stoves and washing machines used in households.
You guys are ganging up on me thinking I'm dumb. I'm not dumb. Many farmers and families suffered due to the Tennessee Valley Authority forced to be relocated. The construction of Pickwick Landing Dam needed 2 towns to be relocated. Poor sharecroppers who didn't own any land suffered because they received no compensation. This was just for the construction of 1 dam. Keep in mind they built 29.
After FDR stabilized the economy with the first New Deal, he introduced the second stage, known as the Second New Deal. The goal of this was to redistribute wealth after the disparity created by the Great Depression. The Second New Deal introduced the Social Security system, brought protections for workers and worker unions, and created jobs for millions of people. Through organizations such as the Workers' Progress Administration, the unemployed attained jobs to support their families while also serving the community with public works projects. To further increase the welfare of the people, the Social Security Act of 1935 was enacted. This attempted to support the uninsured, the retired, and those with disabilities. Boys, how effective do you think the Second New Deal was in benefiting the people?
Well, I think it was peak, and the Social Security Act contributed greatly to this. Allowing the old age to retire with a guarantee to still be paid based on their work contributes to America's welfare and gives retiring Americans something to look forward to. Not only did this help the retiring elderly, but also the many with economic strain.
Ide, stop the cap. Why couldn't he have gone further and created systems for health care like Johnson did during his Great Society campaign? The Great Society created dedicated health insurance for Social Security owners like Medicaid and Medicare. Certainly FDR could have done that. In my opinion, the Great Society would have been an even greater contribution to welfare than what FDR had done with his New Deal.
Well, we have to remember that the New Deal was a result of the need to rebuild American society. It was not meant to be a radical change. It was to redistribute wealth, curb the growth of deflation, and help people recover economically.
All right, Bud. If it was meant to help people recover, why were some people taxed and others weren't? Could this have been avoided? If it was really to help people recover economically, why would taxes on income be employed?
Trump. Buddy, old pal. At this moment in America, we had not fully recovered, even after the first part of the New Deal. This was meant to be a long-term investment to the betterment and benefit of society. The taxes on workers' payrolls funded the promises of the Social Security Act, which helped those who were retiring. Eventually, as the workers whose payrolls were taxed for this grew older, became part of the receiving end, now being repaid for their work and being supported.
That's right, Obama. This was a vital part of FDR's plan, which is still used today. We have talked about what the New Deal had done for the elderly, but what about the working class, who were not exactly in a great economic position? During the second part of the New Deal, FDR introduced the Workers' Progress Administration, which, as mentioned earlier, provided many with jobs to get them back on their feet. In its first year, it produced about 4 million jobs. It created jobs through public works like buildings and art projects. The art projects were supported by Federal Project Number 1, which hired writers, painters, musicians, and other types of artists to boost public enjoyment. What are your guys' thoughts on this topic?
Bush, I swear you're an establishment shill. You're a member of the political elite. I think it was less of an attempt to create opportunity, but rather a method to attain votes. You can't just make jobs out of nowhere. There needs to be demand.
Well, Mr. Tronald Dump, we have to remember that there was a huge amount of unemployed people, so there was in fact a demand, maybe not for the specific projects, but for jobs. And may I add, it was not just building projects, there was also the Civilian Conservation Corps, which created jobs that helped improve America's national parks. As for the building projects, new schools, gyms, and recreational facilities were built, with most of them still present today.
If it was so great, then why haven't I heard of buildings that have been built by the WPA?
You would be surprised by what they built. You have heard about the Griffith Observatory in LA, right?
Wait, they built that place? Oh my gosh, that was one of the scenes from the movie La La Land.
La La Land. Sounds like a place you'd go often, doesn't it, Joe?
Another notable structure would be the Hoover Dam. Even though its authorization to be built was during Herbert Hoover's presidency, WPA workers facilitated the construction during FDR's presidency and the New Deal.
The building of the hydroelectric dam in its area in Nevada, where there are many basins and lakes in surrounding states, would provide many benefits. The benefits would include providing both electricity and water to homes in the expanding western area, as well as a way to reduce flooding caused by the Colorado River. And relating back to the Works Progress Administration, during its 5 years of construction, a total amount of 20,000 workers were hired to complete the project.
As Obama has explained, the WPA had an important role in reducing the unemployment rates, and its works can still be seen today. But how about the role of Federal Project Number 1? How did this improve America?
I don't see how writers and painters would be used to impact America at this moment. It's not like they could fanaticize the Depression away.
While these seemed unimportant at the time, but they provided a source of income to those who specialized in the arts, who particularly struggling at this time. There were 4 original parts: the Federal Art Project, Federal Music Project, Federal Theater Project, and the Federal Writers Project. This type of funding would help foster the golden age of Hollywood and America's dominance in the film medium for time to come.
All right, I think it's time to wrap this up. I got a painting project of my own, by the way, and I'd like to finish it tonight.
Bush, this was an absolute waste of time. Everything the things he did was federal overreach, like packing the courts. Think about what was going on throughout the world at this time. Authoritarianism, specifically under the socialism belt. FDR's socialist policies didn't defeat the Depression. World War II did.
Donald, you got to agree that at least some things that he did were beneficial to the country. The New Deal did not solve the Great Depression, but he made an effort to make the situation better, and the situation did become better.
Guys, Republicans, Democrats, we are here to talk about the New Deal and the Depression. Now, despite your grievances with the man personally, you have to admit FDR had some fire economic policy.
Yeah. While I hate interventionism, I'm starting to think that it might have been necessary.
Same here. While I think the action taken wasn't enough, the foundations definitely are a step in the right direction compared to the decadence and lack of regulation from the 20s and before.
I guess the result of the New Deal isn't as simple as did it solve the Depression, although I think it did answer the question of should the government interfere during times of economic hardship. Now the question is, to what extent should the government interfere? Like Biden said, it did provide the framework for many modern-day policies. FDR was the wind that pushed the windmill of change.
Well, I guess this has been another episode of Presidents on America. Next time. Wait, what do you mean we're going on break? I wanted to cover World War II next. No.